All right, you're ready to go.
Hello, everybody. We're all here. I do believe Tina's checked you in. So we will have the call to order. It is what, Tina, about 6:30?
Yep,
Yep.
6:31.
And next, the approval of the agenda and the consent agenda.
So first we'll do, approval of the agenda. And if anybody wants to remove anything from the consent agenda, now would be the time to do that.
And I want
Okay.
to move, I want to remove item F from the consent agenda.
Okay,
All right.
we
I
can
will
just put
move-
that under the
I'll
permit
move-
program.
Move the agenda as modified.
But don't we want to put F someplace? Or
Yep,
just
F will-
remove it?
F will be under 5A. We'll do
Yeah.
that under there.
Okay, with applications?
Yep,
I'll second.
want me to do the roll call?
Please. I didn't hear Diane. Diane, apparently you second because I see your lovely picture in front of me.
Yes, Diane
I
seconded.
did.
All right.
Let's do roll call.
Okay, Cliff,
Aye.
Diane,
I,
Larry,
Aye.
Pam,
Aye.
and Marge.
Aye.
Okay.
Hi, Pam. She can't hear. Okay.
Hi, Marge.
So next we do go down to visitors' comments, and we've got Bert,
No.
I believe.
Wait,
First, you have to do approval of the consent agenda.
Oh, I thought we did. All
Nope,
right.
that was just the regular agenda.
All right. Approval of the consent agenda with F removed and moved down to 5A.
I move we approve the consent agenda as modified.
And a second?
I'll second again.
All in discussion? All in favor? Then Tina?
Yep, I'll do the roll call. Cliff,
Aye.
Diane,
I,
Larry,
Aye.
Pam,
Aye.
and Marge.
Aye.
Okay.
All right, folks. I do believe now we're at visitor comments. Is that correct?
We are, yes.
And do we have Bert plugged in here?
Yep, I think he
Bert,
can
hello.
unmute himself and give his comment.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Just a brief comment today. Bert Johnson with the Twin Lake Association. As you know, we formed our lake association, well, a little over a year ago now, maybe a year and a half ago, after the big flooding the summer before last. And around three principles. One is to prevent flooding and inflow from West Vadness in particular. The second, to make sure that our lake has an outlet at a historically supported level. And then the third, to preserve water quality and clarity of our lake and the aquatic species in it. And, you know, I'd like to thank the board and the staff for, again, for the work that you did with regard to the outlet, because I think, you know, people have talked about that quite a bit. And I mentioned that at the last time I made a comment in December, but I failed to also thank Paige in particular for her work in scheduling all of the meetings with everybody regarding the shoreline restoration. So I know many of us are anxiously awaiting the spring really for two reasons. One is to see the shoreline restoration work begin. And then also, of course, because we're not that far removed from when the lake level went up by a lot. So we're always anxiously awaiting the spring to see what happens with Twin Lake. So we just wanted you to know that that's where we're at right now. And we look forward to hearing more on this report about what the watershed is doing district-wide to make sure that flooding goes down across the entire district and preserve our lakes and parks. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Bert. Are you, that's it? That was just so sweet and nice. Thank you very much. Okay, permit program.
Yeah, so we have the
Yes.
permit that Larry pulled from the consent. Sorry, go ahead, Nicole.
Oh, yeah, I was just gonna say, this is our annual CIP maintenance and repairs project that we, lump all the sites together and just cover ourselves under primarily the erosion and sediment control rule. So I can take any questions about this.
Larry,
And
you're on
Larry,
mute.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're muted. Mhm.
When I do something I'm not used to doing, I can't remember I've done it anymore.
Mhm.
My question comes in November when the board approved the projects for bidding in the CIP program. There were 12 programs. Now there are 14, and I'd like to hear, not that I'm against it, but I'd just like to hear what the other two programs entail, particularly the Grass Lake berm, because I did notice that Tina and Nicole were in meetings about this a couple weeks ago. So I'm just curious as to what's going on.
Yeah, so our meeting on previous wetland mitigation work actually came out of this being added to the CIP, because we figure if, we're in there doing this work, that we might want to couple it with fixing some issues from our 2018 project with respect to the wetland mitigation areas. But if you remember last month, there was a part of the Owasso Basin project that got removed, which was the Ryan Drive improvements, and that was going to be postponed until a later date, coupled with some other work that needed to be done. And then a couple of projects were added, including Mcknight Basin erosion and sinkhole repair. I believe that's a site we were at last year, but it consists of investigating a sinkhole that was observed, replacing riprap, and generally repairing the erosion there. And then the Grass Lake emergency overflow is in the same area where the water was flowing over the trail and caused some washout. And I don't know if it was 2019 maybe, that riprap was placed there as sort of a emergency temporary measure. And now we're proposing to add to CIP for this year, removing some of the riprap that's immediately adjacent to that trail, adding class 5, compacting it, and then preparing it for paver placement. If you have more questions on the pavers in particular and what they do, I would probably defer to Bar or Dave.
Yeah, Brad can address that if there's more questions.
Yeah, Larry, that's the overflow over the path that had washed out, from that constant flow when Grass Lake was very high. And as Nicole had mentioned, there was a temporary measure basically to get in there so it wouldn't wash out the actual blacktop. We did lose part of that path, but we didn't want the whole thing to wash out. So now it's really, since the water levels have gone down, it's a good time to make something more permanent that's going to be more stable over the long term. So when that overflow gets utilized at some point in the future in the high water levels, we won't have the same scour potential at that point.
I like that.
And I could just add to the Mcknight Basin sinkhole. This was identified through an inspection that the DNR does. It's an earthen dam, so it's one of the only permitted dams that the district has. And there is periodic inspection. We do an annual report on that. But the DNR also does some occasional inspections as well, because they're the regulatory agency that permits that under the dam safety program. And there's a sinkhole right by the outlet of Mcknight Basin where it flows through the embankment underneath Mcknight Road. And they were just, there was some concern. We looked inside the pipe. There was a little bit of pipe separation. So rather than letting that go and risk a bigger failure, we thought we'd just address it at this time rather than monitoring it further.
That's what I wanted to know, since these things popped up and I didn't know what they were. Thank you.
Yep.
Anything else regarding the permit program? Enforcement action report?
We'll need to take a motion.
Yeah.
I'll move that we approve permit number 2101 RWMWD 21 CIP Maintenance and Repair Program.
Seconded.
Any more discussion? Tina, should we vote on this then?
We should. Cliff,
Aye.
Diane,
Aye.
Larry,
Aye.
Pam,
Aye.
and Marge.
Aye. So does that now bring us to the enforcement action report?
It does, yes.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, things are slowing down a little bit, obviously with the snow cover and somewhat freezing temperatures. We're still doing inspections, although they're less frequent. But yeah, if you have any questions, it's kind of routine findings. Where there was non-compliance, we did follow up and got those issues addressed.
Any questions? Do we need a motion on this to approve it? No?
Just a comment. You requested, I believe, that we continue the program for single lot permitting.
Yeah, I think that's in the next memo, but yeah, that,
Okay. All right. I'll
yeah,
wait.
we can talk about that. Sure. If you want me, I can just move to that now.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the past few years, I've been providing kind of statistical reference kind of for our inspections and violations. So I updated that for the periods 2018 to 2020. So you have the last couple years also for reference. You'll find that a couple of values from 2018 and 2019 list not reported. And that's because I've added those following our discussion a year ago based on some board requests for additional information as I understood them. So if you have additional needs for information or clarification on these, please let me know. But I can just generally kind of go through what the kind of overall trends. We had less applications this year, although last year was really high as far as what we've seen for a long time. So that was 2019 was sort of an outlier. We did complete more erosion and sediment control inspections this year, but also reported less violations. So that's an encouraging trend. And also less serious findings of non-compliance as evidenced by less deductions in permit applicant surety. Trying to think what else. So I think this was requested last year, as I understood it, was the question was asked, so of all the inspections that you do, what % of those are generally non-compliant? So I flushed that out this year, and granted, we had many inspections, but only 6% of those were found to be non-compliant, which means receiving a letter grade of C or worse. So we have a letter grade system A through F, F meaning failing, A meaning you're doing great and there's nothing requested, which honestly doesn't happen very often. There's usually maintenance items that we request. But and then I think I was also asked of the active sites, what % of those are reporting these violations? So I found that about half of the sites, of the 64 active sites, were responsible for those total violations reported. So WACA violations are the Wetland Conservation Act applications that I get for things such as wetland boundaries, sometimes replacement plans like we saw this year with the Gold Line project. So I just list those. They're a little bit separate from our grading permit, but I just have been including those in there. The most common violations are nothing new from previous years. These are items that require frequent maintenance. So when we see that they're not being maintained, those obviously get flagged the most. Oh, and I should mention, you know, we had some pauses and isolation moments this year with COVID-19. And despite that, those pauses and inspections, for a couple weeks at a time, we were able to complete more overall than we did last year. And I think that's in part to Mary, our inspector, sharing some workload on cost share inspections with Simba this year. So she was able to complete more of the construction inspections. Some interesting new safety protocols, we're usually used to arriving on site, kind of knocking on the trailer door and meeting with contractors in the trailer prior to our inspections. And we refrained from doing that this year. We didn't want to be in enclosed spaces with anybody, even with masks on. So we communicated that at the beginning of the season that we weren't going to be entering job trailers. And it worked out well. Mary, who's doing the most of our inspections, she still has a close relationship with contractors on site. And a lot of times they're not even in the trailer anyway. So we didn't find that our communication or relationships suffered because of that. And then just some reminders on updates that happened in 2020. That Stormwater Impact Fund increased on January 1st. So that was the whole year we've been using that. One applicant had requested to pay into the Stormwater Impact Fund compared to 5 the previous year. So I think 2019 was unusually high for those requests, but I'm hoping that the increase in those fees are, I'm hoping that it's showing that it's discouraging folks from trying to jump to that option. And then the single lot residential, we've talked about this quite a bit. The board did approve a pilot or a test program for the rest of 2020. So that actually went into effect in August. So for the last 4 months of the year, that program's been in place. We've had that separate permit application page on the website. It's kind of ironic that we got less interest after we were ready for it. But I think that had a lot to do with the time of year as well. So during that pilot, there was one application that was staff approved, and then 2 applications required board approval for single lot residential due to variance requests. So if the board has no objection, I would request that we continue this into 2021 because, it was sort of a smaller sample size. And I would just kind of like to see, if we get a lot of interest again in the spring, early summer, how that works out, and we can gather some better data on that. But we didn't have any violations or erosion control concerns, and no unpermitted floodplain fill that we know of. So, but yeah, I'll take any questions on that. Or if you want to see any different information or information reported differently for next year.
Comment, I think you should continue doing what you're doing. Sounds great to me. Anyone else?
Yeah, I would move that we approve the continuation of the single lot residential permitting evaluation through July of 2021, at which time we can evaluate whether we want to keep it and make it permanent or change it.
Seconded.
Okay, and Diane has her hand up.
It's on another comment, so we can finish this first.
Okay, sounds good.
So we have a motion, correct? And we have a
Right.
second discussion. All right, Tina, should we do it?
Sure. Cliff,
Aye.
Diane,
Aye.
Larry,
Aye.
Pam,
Aye.
and Marge.
Aye. That brings us to Stewardship
Oh,
Grant
wait a minute.
Program.
A
Oh,
couple
sorry,
of
Cliff.
questions. I have a question and Diane had one too. Go ahead,
Okay,
Diane.
Oh, I just wanted to say, I noticed that, as you pointed out, that half of the sites accounted for all of the violations. And I wondered, are those more frequent flyer problems, or do we need more education, or is there any theme?
We had a couple I would say, I don't want to say bad actors, but we had a couple issues where we almost brought a stop work order. But other than that, nothing really sticks out. So those were like 2 sites that I can think of that we really struggled with. Other than that, you know, violations doesn't mean you necessarily get a non-compliant report. You know, you could have violations and still be in compliance if there's maintenance items or something less severe. So it's not to say that half of the sites were consistently non-compliant, but that they shouldered all of the violations, whether they were severe or not. Yeah, go ahead.
That was my question as well, is what's the difference between violation and a non-compliant inspection report?
Yeah, so there are, I should know this, how many questions we have on our inspection report, but they're all tied to a particular maintenance item. So one question is related to perimeter control, for instance, and one would, you know, could be street sweeping. So you could receive a violation for any one of those questions. And depending on the severity or the number of violations, that determines your letter grade for the report as a whole. So you could have a couple violations, but still found to be compliant overall if they were less severe.
But they still get notice that they need to do the street sweeping or whatever. Okay.
Yep. And then if there's kind of a more egregious or negligence, or, you know, if there's a discharge or something like that, that could be a situation where you only have one violation, but you're non-compliant because it's a more serious outcome. So yeah, you could have like fix your silt fence. We told you last time, now it's a violation, but if that's the only thing wrong, you're probably still going to be compliant overall, especially if no impacts have occurred. So
yeah, okay.
Does that make sense?
Someone else had a comment, I believe, or am I wrong?
I think that was everybody.
That was everybody?
Yep.
Yep.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Now let's move to the stewardship grant program. No applications.
In first month of the year.
Yep, starting fresh. I did realize I made one mistake on the budget status. I got excited just zeroing everything. We do have some of those maintenance grants that carry over. So the end of last year, we had 41 maintenance grants at 31,500. So that all of those are continuing. They're still in their 5-year program. So you'll see that next month.
Okay.
Is that it? All right, thank you very much again. It's hard to tell when people are finished from over here. That brings us to item 7, the maintenance and repair bid review and award.
Yeah, I'll share my screen and Brad's gonna talk you through this.
I'm sure he is.
You see that okay?
Yes.
I can see it fine. Thanks, Tina. As we approved the permit a few moments ago, just wanted to follow up. We did receive 7 bids on the annual CIP maintenance and repairs project. I guess I was very encouraged that we did have 7 bidders. I was a bit disappointed of the spread of the bids. You can see over in the second to the far right hand of the table there, the low bidder was Fitzgerald Excavating at $518,053.50, all the way up to 1.7+ million. That's the biggest spread I've seen on a project like this ever. So we looked into it a little bit further, and there were 4 bid items where we had wide variability. The mobilization demobilization bid item is kind of our where those incidentals are put by the contractors, and with 12 to 14 sites, sometimes they see that a little bit differently. The inefficiencies from moving to site, and some of those incidentals that are tied with each individual site. So there's wide variability on the MOB, DMOB bid item. The control of water, we've got a big chunk of this project is excavating sediment and muck out of maybe a stormwater pond that needs to be cleaned out, or the Jarvis Creek system from Owasso Boulevard all the way down to Country Drive. There's wide variety or wide variability in the bid amounts there as well, and controlling the water associated with that work and the sediment and muck clean out that's tied with that. So that, bid prices that are from a unit price, 2, 3, 4 times what other contractors are providing in this bidding. And then the tree removal was pretty much a widespread. There's not a lot of tree removal, but those bid items were all over the place as well. So the engineers estimate of probable construction cost was $538,000 for this project. So we were kind of between the low bidder and the second low. Fitzgerald, of course, they've done a number of projects for the district. They were on the 2020 project, and we have familiarity with them. I will say, and Dave can comment here, I think Jason Fitzgerald was probably one of the only contractors that went to every site and looked at the site, access to the site, very familiar with the work. A lot of this is work that has been done in previous projects that he's been involved with, and he's cleaned out sediment and muck for the district in past projects as well. So I'm confident in his familiarity with the work. And he was right in line, or very close to in line with how we estimated it. I'm just, like I said, I'm a bit disappointed that we have some of these bidders that are up there well over $1 million for this project, which I think a lot of that might be tied to busyness and maybe not taking the time to actually go look at the sites. I'll take any questions.
Brad, if my memory is correct, I've heard only good things about Fitzgerald. They were a little slow on one project, I think, but that was rectified.
Yes, that's correct. We had some challenges with their schedule and a little bit of being unorganized on an earlier project. Since then, we basically had one key meeting with Jason Fitzgerald. Tracy was involved, I was involved, and Tina was involved. And we basically had a heart-to-heart with him with respect to his work and what he would need to do to be able to demonstrate he could get things back on track. And he has done that ever since. And again,
Well,
Dave,
good.
I'll give you a chance to chime in here because I know you've worked with Jason a lot since that meeting.
Yeah, no, I think Jason has stepped up his game since then and really has done a good job, and all his work is good. And any deficiencies that he has with the price you save, you can fix that pretty quick.
Yeah. So Brad,
and we have talked to Jason about his bid. He's very comfortable with it, even after seeing all the other bidders. Very excited for the work. He said, I need the work, I like the work, and I like working for the district. So sorry, Mark, I interrupted you.
Great.
Good.
So your suggestion is that we award this to Fitzgerald.
He has met all the requirements of the bidding process as laid out in the bidding documents. He has demonstrated by past projects with the district that he can do quality work, and his bid is very consistent with the estimate that we prepared in advance of the project. So yes, that's where I would go with this.
Okay, Brad, so we need a motion.
I'll move to accept the bids and award the 2021 CIP maintenance and repair project to Fitzgerald Excavating. Direct staff to prepare and mail the notice of award, prepare draft agreements, and review the required submittals.
All right, is there a second?
Second.
Discussion? Tina?
Cliff,
Aye.
Diane,
Aye.
Larry,
Aye.
Pam,
Aye.
and Marge.
Aye. So that brings it to the internal load analysis, blah, 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 Deep Lakes report and discussion.
Yes, and Aaron is
And
here.
who's gonna do this, Tina?
I believe Aaron is going to be doing this presentation today.
Ah, good.
Yes, I love I should have put blah, blah, blah. In the,
I mean, other people can read the same thing I'm reading.
yeah. Well, maybe that's a great segue, actually. So this technical report that you guys got is pretty science laden, which we had Keith Pilgrim do this work in collaboration with some other folks at BAR who are true chemists and scientists and lake sediment experts. So I struggled a bit with how to structure this presentation. I know that we have, across the managers, we have a wide range of backgrounds and a wide range of years of experience on the board. So I wasn't exactly sure what each of you were bringing in terms of background information on this topic. So the report itself is focused very much on the chemistry and the internal loading dynamics of each of these 8 lakes and what that might mean for future management. In the presentation, I did add a little bit of background information to round us out a little bit. But one of the things that I'd like you to think about as we discuss this topic tonight is when I'm done with this presentation, I'd like to know what more information you would like to have going forward as we make future decisions about internal load management. We're not making any thumbs up, thumbs down decisions tonight. This is for your information. It's for Tina and Brad and I to get some feedback, to kind of read the room on what we think could happen in the future, and then to hear what more information you might want going forward. So that's what we're talking about tonight. I'm gonna share my screen here. Let's see here. Give me 1 second here. Okay. All right. Every one of these applications is a little bit different. Oh, okay, that didn't work. Sorry, bear with me for a moment here. Okay. Are you seeing a title slide here?
Yep.
Okay. So I'd like to say, as we go through this presentation, if you have a question, feel free to ask. I know that can be a little tricky with Zoom, but feel free to call out my name, or Tina and Brad, if you're kind of watching folks in the video windows, if you could let me know if someone's got a question. That's totally fine for us to stop and start. I've got about 18 slides here. So not a long presentation, but fairly loaded up. So let's get going. So we're talking about the 2020 internal load analysis that BAR and district staff did, looking at 8 different lakes throughout the watershed district. This slide I think we've already covered, kind of setting the stage for what we're talking about tonight. And this is just a map of where these lakes are located. Some of these lakes are big enough to be pretty visible on this map. Lake Owasso is the biggest lake that we looked at, and also a deep lake, the only deep lake of the 8 that we looked at. We also, in this quadrant of the district, looked at Lake Emily, Round Lake, the one in Little Canada. There are 2, one in Maplewood, one in Little Canada, and one in and Bennett Lake. Over here on the right side of the slide, you can see we looked at Coleman Lake, Wakefield Lake, Beaver Lake, and Battle Creek Lake. So the reason we looked at these 8 lakes is that these are either considered to be impaired for excess nutrients, and that is the case for Coleman, Wakefield, and Bennett. Or they are considered to be at risk of future impairment because the surface water quality concentrations of phosphorus are getting pretty close to the state standards. And that's true for Owasso, Round Lake, Lake Emily, and Beaver Lake, and Battle Creek Lake. So we've got our eye on these 8 lakes, and many of them are shallow. And oftentimes in shallow lakes, internal load of phosphorus from the sediments can be a concern. And we're going to get deep into that concept in a few slides. But first, I wanted us to take a big step back and look at the impaired lakes and where we're at in terms of implementation. So I'm not going to go through the whole TMDL process and the TMDL studies that were done on these lakes. We could certainly look at that at a different time. That's one example of something where maybe more information might be helpful. But regardless, Coleman, Wakefield, and Bennett have implementation plans that were written as part of the TMDL process that would dictate what should be done to reduce phosphorus levels getting to the lake. So the purpose of a TMDL report is to figure out what's causing the impairment and what pollutant that is, where it's coming from, and what should be done about it. So each of those TMDL studies came up with basically an implementation plan. And we've been working on those for many years now. So for Coleman Lake, just as a reminder, the combination of internal sediment release of phosphorus and external or watershed loads of phosphorus coming into the lake in like an average year of precipitation looks like what you see here on the slide. It's about 76% watershed runoff and 23% internal phosphorus release and about 1% atmospheric deposition. And based off of that knowledge of how different sources of phosphorus combine to create the water quality that we're worried about, we could figure out what could be done. And so that was a combination of both watershed and internal load management strategies. On each of these three slides, I've also put a reminder in of what the phosphorus concentration is in each of these lakes. This is from the water quality annual report that you saw last month, I think. So this graph is right from that. So you can see for Coleman Lake, the last several years have been relatively good, all things considered, but we have seen a bit of a decrease in water quality due to increased phosphorus concentration in the last couple of years, which is why we've started to wonder, within a few years, we may be looking at needing to do an internal load management action again. The last time we did anything in Coleman Lake was 2010, in terms of internal load, was in 2010 with an alum treatment. So it's something we watch to figure out when something might need to happen again. In terms of Bennett Lake, it's a different combination. Every lake is a little bit different. For Bennett, the fraction of the phosphorus load coming from internal load that's really causing the impairment is much bigger than it is for Coleman Lake. So smaller lake, smaller load, but 48% of the overall phosphorus budget that's creating the problem is likely coming from internal load. And we estimate actually that there's another chunk that's coming from the macrophytes in that lake as well. Watershed load is 43% of the equation. So we've been chipping away at that watershed load reduction, but we haven't done anything for internal load just yet. And this is what Bennett Lake has been looking like over the last 10 years, as we discussed last month. So a slow improvement, but a lot of moving around, and we're rarely into a zone where it would meet the shallow lake water quality criteria, shown in that yellow line there. For Wakefield, it's something kind of in between. We've got 32% contribution from internal load and 67% coming from the watershed. We do suspect that there's some macrophyte involvement here as well. And there is a different concurrent study going on looking in much more detail at the nutrient cycling in Wakefield Lake. So I'll mention that again later in the presentation. And again, the chart that you saw last month showing the water quality in Wakefield Lake as it's been the last 10 years. In order for a lake to be considered impaired, they look at the average phosphorus concentration over the last 10 years to determine whether or not it's going to be meeting that lake standard. So for Wakefield and Bennett and Coleman, those are all shallow lakes. So the standard is 60 micrograms per liter of phosphorus. So as I said, each of these lakes has a TMDL study associated with it that's been approved by the EPA. And as far as how far we've come in implementing what we said we would do to meet those load reductions, I've got some information here up on the screen. So for Coleman Lake, at this point in time through 2019, based on projects that have gone in through the permit program, through the Crusher program, and then specific CIP, more regional projects, we've done everything we said we would do in the report for the watershed load reduction. For Wakefield Lake, we're at about 87%, and for Bennett Lake, we're at about 78%. So this is something we look at the end of every year This goes into some of the MS4 permitting documentation that the cities supply to the PCA. So we keep tracking this every year to see how close we are to finishing the implementation plan. In terms of internal load activities, internal load management or reduction activities through 2019, Coleman Lake is the only lake where we've done an alum treatment plant or an alum treatment in the lake itself. So that was done in 2010, as I mentioned earlier. We haven't done anything yet in Wakefield Lake or in Bennett Lake. So if there, maybe I'll stop and ask if anyone has any questions on that before I start getting into actually internal load complexities and that part. Does anyone have a question?
I do.
Tina, can you see the hands?
Yep, go ahead, Larry.
Does the fact that we've done 100% complete of the TMDL implementation plan and it's still impaired mean that it didn't work?
Well, so let's go back to, that's a good question. If we go back to this slide here, I mean, the story for, the implementation plans for each of those 3 lakes involved both watershed load reductions and internal load reductions. And the internal load reduction isn't really a one and done. That's something that is sort of a long-term management strategy. So the last time we did an alum treatment in that lake was 2010. It's now 2021, but we've gotten 10 years out of that alum treatment. And I think we have some more time with that treatment. There's still some capacity for phosphorus binding with that treatment. But at some point that's going to wear off. At some point the phosphorus, the alum won't have the binding capacity that it had. The sites, on all those molecules will be taken up by phosphorus, and the remaining phosphorus stockpile in the lake will need some attention. So it's a long-term strategy. So, you can look at the last several years here and see that, most of those years we actually, the average of these last 10 years, I think was still under 60 micrograms per liter. I don't know if we'll continue to see that though. We may see, who knows? Maybe this had something to do with precipitation being so high. Maybe we'll see this come back up. Maybe we won't. So at some point, it'll be time to revisit the internal load in this lake.
Okay, and another question I had looking at the pie chart in this is it work if you took care of all of the internal load, would it suddenly be compliant, or do you have to really work hard on the external load to get the lake to be compliant?
Mm-hmm. So it's a combination. So when we say in an TMDL implementation plan that the plan is to do, say, an alum treatment, which for Coleman Lake, that was the plan. We assume we can get about an 80% reduction of the internal load of phosphorus from that treatment. So it's highly, highly effective when it's dosed properly and managed properly. So even if you did that, even if you got 90%, you'd still have a watershed load you're dealing with. And part of the TMDL work is figuring that combination out, figuring out how much of each of these do we need to do, and how do we lay that path forward. So you have to have the two, and we've done a lot of good things, and we'll continue to do good things in these watersheds. We'll still look for opportunities, and like I said, in Wakefield and Bennett, we still have some more perhaps regional work to do. But to assume we can meet these goals without doing any attention to internal load is not reasonable. So
I'll just add, Aaron, also the board that existed at the time we were working on the TMDL was also heavily interested in dealing with the watershed load as best we could. So that emphasis was really on, can we keep it from getting to the lake as a primary goal of what we were trying to achieve. And so we continue to emphasize that, dealing with the watershed load prior to dealing with the internal load. So that's
right.
how it has been.
And that's pretty standard lake management practice. Get the watershed under control, and then get that as far as you can get it, and then look to internal sources. Because if you go straight to internal load and you haven't managed your external load, you could just bury your alum treatment if you go that route.
On Bennett Lake, isn't the Willow Pond or Lake filter supposed to help that out, and has it?
Yep. Well, that one has been sitting offline. COVID threw a wrench into that. So that's going to, yeah, it affected everything. So that'll be fired up next year.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Aaron, that's counted in your percentage though, correct? Where you show the
yeah,
percentage.
it is. So
Yeah,
that's a little
because
out of
it's
sync,
out.
but that is included. Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
So if you go back to that slide for a second. Yeah, so those top 3 lines are the external load implementation. So that 78% does include
Yep.
the spent lime treatment that will be up and running.
Yep.
Next year.
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yep.
Good. And one final question, do these lakes affect the quality of the water bodies they empty into?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's all a chain. I mean, so on one hand, yes, Bennett Lake would affect the water quality of Lake Owasso to a small degree. To a small degree, the water quality in, Bennett Lake would affect Jarvis Lake, but you get a dilution effect for sure.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Yep. Any other questions before I move on? Okay, great. So I thought I would throw in this slide. This is a graphic illustration of some of the description in the technical report about how internal load works and what the different substances and chemical combinations are down in the lake sediments that affect the phosphorus level that gets back into the water. So, we talk a lot about the dissolved and particulate phosphorus that's coming in off the watershed that comes into the water and undergoes sedimentation. So organic and inorganic particles settle down to the bottom of the lake. Some of that is permanently immobilized through different kinds of chemical reactions we'll talk about in a minute. And then some of it is released back into the water column. So this is where we talk about nutrient cycling. What is also not shown on here is that you also have plants that can grow in the lake and take up phosphorus through the roots in the sediment and then die and come back down as organic material too. And there's fish and other insects and things that are moving those nutrients all over the place. But this is a good general depiction of what's going on. The different types of forms that involve phosphorus in the sediment can be considered both dissolved in the form of phosphate, but also in terms of an organic phosphorus that's dissolved. The particulates are a bunch of different things comprised of really typical and abundant minerals that are present on Earth. So there's iron complexes, there's aluminum complexes, there's calcium complexes, there's clays, and then there's organic material. So that can sit on the bottom. A lot of past Ramsey-Washington projects have focused on the removal of dissolved phosphorus from stormwater. So I thought it might be helpful to remind you of all the different watershed projects that we've put in that are trying to grab that dissolved phosphorus before it moves into these lakes we're concerned about. So when we talk about iron complexes, this is why we do iron enhanced sand. That's why we put iron in sand. Stormwater flows through, at Maplewood Mall, we've got iron enhanced sand filters in the middle of some of the rain gardens or the Beam Avenue filter. Water flows past the iron in the presence of oxygen will bind with the phosphorus before it comes out the bottom of the filter. And so the water leaving the filter is cleaner. In terms of forms of aluminum, so we've got the Tanner's alum plant. The reason that we built that plant was to treat water as it's coming into Tanner's Lake and treat it with alum. And so that there are aluminum hydroxides formed and precipitated out so that those phosphorus molecules are taken out of the stormwater before it gets to Tanner's Lake. Also, I mentioned the Coleman Lake alum treatment. That was an alum treatment within the lake itself, lake-wide. In terms of calcium, we've been tinkering with the calcium a lot lately. We have the CC17, that crushed limestone in Coleman Basin. Those permeable, that's the permeable reactive barriers we talk about. Also, there's going to be a spent lime application in Wakefield Pond, which is a research project, again, that was delayed because of COVID, but we'll be hitting that this year. That's a grant-funded project in partnership with BAR and the Watershed District. And then the Frost Canard spent lime filter and the Willow Pond CMAX spent lime filter have also been constructed to, again, to leverage calcium binding with phosphorus. So in terms of the organic phosphorus, you may wonder, well, where is it all coming from? That can come from watershed runoff. This is the reason we tell people not to dump their grass clippings in the streets. And this is the reason that we do street sweeping to pick up leaves. And it can come from, it can also come from macrophytes growing and then dying and decomposing in the bottom of the lake or other lake biota. So I'm assuming that you all read through the report and you saw that Keith was mentioning two different forms of phosphorus that we were looking at. One is he was calling mobile phosphorus, and the other he was calling organic phosphorus. And these are important because these are the forms of phosphorus that can be released from the sediment. So, and we tend to look at iron in particular because the forms of phosphorus that can bind with iron, that bond is sensitive to the oxygen level in the water. So if your lake undergoes anoxic or very low oxygen conditions at the bottom, any phosphorus that's bound to iron will release. That's why we always worry in an iron enhanced sand filter that it's draining, it gets dry, it needs time off from the water because we need oxygen to be present in order to have iron and phosphorus combined. So we look at that, we call the type of phosphorus that can be released from iron under anoxic conditions, mobile phosphorus. And then we're also looking at organic phosphorus, and that type of phosphorus is released during decomposition, which is a rate of temperature. So lakes get warmer, decompose faster, that organic phosphorus is released. So this is one of the graphics in the report. A lot of sediment cores were taken and dissected and scrutinized, and there's a lot of data in the report, but this was one graphic that I thought was particularly helpful. This is looking at the differences in the magnitude of mobile phosphorus and organically bound phosphorus in lake sediments in these 8 different lakes. So the magnitude of these levels indicates the lake's internal loading potential, but also the type, the mobile phosphorus versus the organically bound phosphorus fractions, give you a sense of why that release is happening. So you can see there's a really wide difference between these lakes. Coleman has more mobile phosphorus, and the same is true of Battle Creek Lake and Beaver Lake. Whereas if you get over here to the right side of the chart, we've got more organically bound phosphorus. And to be completely honest, I don't know necessarily why that's true. That may be something we can figure out, but lakes are all different. They have different biota, they have different tributary areas. But it's important to know what these different types of phosphorus are that are coming out of the sediments to know what to do about it. The other thing that we looked at in these sediments was the amount of extractable iron. So because you can look at the level of iron to phosphorus ratios in the sediments to figure out which lakes have enough iron in their sediments to bind phosphorus in the presence of oxygen. So sometimes it can be, usually lakes have quite a lot of iron in their sediments, which means if they are mixing a lot and stay oxygenated, the internal load can be pretty well naturally managed. Sometimes people do add iron. That is something that SAFL is starting to experiment with. And in fact, in Shoreview Commons, so the campus of Shoreview City Hall, they're trying to figure out a good way to test Shoreview Commons Pond by putting an iron aggregate application in there. So the Watershed District has been doing some monitoring of the nutrient cycling in the pond there before that iron aggregate gets placed to see if that has any impact on the internal loading of the pond. But if you don't have enough oxygen at the bottom of sediments, additional iron won't help you. But looking at how much iron is in the sediments was something that we looked at. And in addition, in Coleman Lake, we also looked at how much aluminum was in the sediments to see if we could tell about the fate of the alum treatment in 2010, to see if that was being buried or what was going on there. So that was another thing that was analyzed. The other thing that was done to help diagnose to characterize the internal loading in each of these lakes was a lake model that Keith created using Python, a computer coding language. And so he developed a model that estimated the rate of phosphorus release from lake bottom sediments during the summer. And he compared the lake outputs, the model outputs, to monitoring data. And you can see that information in the report. The inputs for the model were the average mobile P concentration in the lake sediment and the average organic P concentration in the sediment, the dissolved oxygen and the lake water temperature by lake depth, and then the lake bottom area by the depth, because different lake shapes also have different internal loads because it affects how much mixing happens, which then affects things like temperature and oxygen. So we're going to stop for questions in just a minute. I thought I would round this out with a couple of concluding statements, and then we'll rest on that table that's in the executive summary, and we can talk about some questions. And then I've got a couple other slides for us to talk through. So generally speaking, there were sort of three different kinds of groupings for the lakes that were studied and modeled. So there were lakes with high organic phosphorus and no relationship between surface phosphorus concentrations and changes in like oxygen. Okay, so high organic phosphorus and not much of an effect. Like when lakes would mix, it didn't seem to help the internal load much at all, meaning that mobile phosphorus might not be a driving factor. There were lakes with high mobile phosphorus and a clear relationship between the surface concentrations and lake oxygen concentrations. And then lakes with low mobile phosphorus and a clear relationship between surface concentrations and dissolved oxygen. So lots of different pairings of different mechanisms that led to the creation of that summary table. So why don't we go to the summary table, and then we can talk about things you may have questions with. We can go back to other slides. I realize this is a lot of information. So let's go to this slide, which is sort of the bottom line summary. Basically saying these aren't recommendations, but these are like it's an overview of the types of options one might have in controlling internal load in these various lakes based on the modeling, the sediment cores, and the chemistry in the lakes. There's a lot of footnotes in this table, I'm sure you noticed. Some of these options are rather tried and true and things that are known pathways forward. Others are a little more experimental. Things like iron addition, there are folks that do things like that, but aeration can be very tricky. And so even though on paper and chemically speaking, that could be something that would make sense, that could be very tricky to execute. So with that, why don't I entertain some questions?
Hi, I have some questions and comments. And thank you for the presentation and the report. I really liked all the science in there. I thought it was really well done. So I'm wondering why other approaches like harvesting vegetation in the shallow lakes wasn't considered as an option.
Well, that was something that was looked at. I don't know, is Bill on the line? I can only see 6 faces in my screen.
Yeah, he's here.
Okay, that was that Coleman, Bill?
Yeah, we looked at harvesting in Coleman, and we definitely pulled a substantial amount of phosphorus out through harvesting, but I think it's a tool that is you look at it as a complement to other more effective measures like alum treatment or iron enhancement, or a host of watershed practices and improvements. But just harvesting alone, I don't think you're going to get the result that we want.
For me as a comment, I got a couple quick things, and then I'll be quiet. But one, I would like to see, like, well, how much would it work, and how much would it cost if you're comparing it to these other things? If it doesn't cost too much to figure that out, or to augment these things.
You're talking about plant harvesting?
The harvesting.
Yeah, we have a good handle on that. We're actually publishing a paper in Lakeline magazine this winter on the data that we gathered through the COMA effort. So we have a really solid idea of what the benefits are and the cost per pound of phosphorus removal. So we could certainly add that in the analysis as an option.
Right. And then finally, so for those of you who've been on the board or on staff for a long time, you know that in general, I'm really opposed to using massive amounts of chemicals to solve our problems, especially when there are other options available to solve those problems that, and then, and then also in particular with alum, aluminum ions are a potent neurotoxin, which concerns me. And it also concerns me that, and I'm not really clear on the effects of the alum flock coating the bottom of the lake and how that impacts biological organisms living down there. So for these concerns, I'm just never going to be supportive of continuing to use alum, when especially we have other options we could pursue.
I think
go ahead.
Sorry, Diane has her hand up, and then Cliff.
Yeah, I had a question on this chart. When you describe on the aeration that more investigation is needed, what would that investigation involve? And are there any proposals to do that? And it kind of follows up on Pam's concern.
Well, that leads into one of the questions that was in the cover memo for the report in the board packet, which is, so aeration is something that is done at times for internal load management in deep lakes, because there is some concern. Well, for one thing, it can be difficult to get aeration to effectively inject oxygen into the water column. And especially in a shallow lake, when you've only got 6-8 feet of water, in a deep lake, you've got much more than that. So when I say more investigation, I mean looking for examples where people have actually successfully done that in a shallow lake without actually creating more turbidity. There's a fine balance between, aerating so that you can actually get oxygen to get into the water column versus physically destabilizing the water column and, agitating the sediments so that you actually create turbidity. So we would need to do more investigation on whether there are any systems people have devised where they're doing that for the purposes of internal load management. There's tons of examples of, people doing it for fisheries or for like duckweed control, where they just want like a agitation on the surface to keep duckweed from growing. But I'm not familiar with any large scale shallow lake installation. So we'd want to know if that's possible. The other thing that I know I was interested in hearing from the managers is it's very likely that that would be significantly more expensive than alum, because we're talking about compressors and lines, strung across lakes or moving parts. And, we can continue to look into those things, but I know that that would be significantly more expensive and potentially less tried and true. That said, I mean, it is on this table because chemically speaking, there are some lakes that show, you can tell from the monitoring data and in conjunction with the lake model, Wakefield Lake, for example, the internal load gets tamped down really quickly when the lake gets some oxygen in it. And then when that starts to decline, the phosphorus levels bubble back up again. So, if there was a way to do that, that might be compelling, but I think it would be quite expensive.
Oh, Diane, you're muted.
Yeah, why is it expensive, Aaron? I assume we can't use the bubbler we've got. Is it equipment or monitoring, or what goes into the costs, and how long a period of time to
Yeah.
do it?
The equipment, I mean, the equipment is what I'm thinking of. I mean, it's compressed air bubbling across. I mean, Coleman Lake is what, 70 acres, I think.
Right, so Erin, maybe you can
Wakefield is
explain,
smaller.
it's not like an aerator that you would see that
Right.
we've used before. This is a different kind of system that would send
Yeah.
out leads basically into the various parts of the lake. And when you have a large lake, that's a lot of area to.
Yeah, it's not like what you'd see. I don't know if it's still functioning, but I know for a while there was one on Bennett Lake. It's not like that.
Or Casey Lake for fisheries.
Yeah, yeah, very different.
You've got that, and you've got the power demand of that, whether that be multiple solar units. I don't know if that could even power it. Otherwise, you'd have continuous power that have to be run to that, and it would have to be distributed across the lake. You know, it's not just one unit.
And maintenance.
Part of the lake. Maintenance of it.
Yeah, I know, Bill, you recall the at HB Fuller, they had a 3-head aerator system installed, and I know after even the first year they had real maintenance issues. I think they ultimately abandoned it, but
Yeah, it was really, it's on and off. I'm not sure if it's in operation right now, but it was an operational nightmare.
Yeah.
And I think, from what I understand, aeration is effective in ponds and very small lakes. And I think Coleman, it would be out of the realm to use a tool like that, because you're talking about miles and miles of line.
Yeah, maybe Round Lake, smaller.
Yeah, and especially with the macrophytes, the aquatic plants, you don't get that oxygen dispersal. So you really have to lay those lines close together in order for it to be effective. On a situation like Coleman, I don't know, it'd be a long shot if it were feasible, in my opinion.
Question I have, Aaron,
Yeah.
I know back years ago when we did the Beaver Lake Management Plan, like Meg Ratty was looking into the idea of spreading spent lime over the entire
Lime
lake.
slurry, yeah.
Yeah, lime slurry. That's not reflected here. Can you respond to that?
Well, that is an excellent question for Keith that I will.
Okay.
Keith. And we are looking at doing that. It's not so much, well, I guess it would be kind of a lime slurry that we're going to be putting on the Wakefield pond, just experimental, small scale. Then that when I say Wakefield pond, I mean the one that's just south of Wakefield Lake. So that will yield information. That's something we're looking at for a pond management for internal load, but a pond scale. The lime slurry for lakes was something that was talked about a lot more back then. And I guess I don't know off the top of my head why we don't hear about that so much anymore, but that's something I could look into.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I seem to recall, Aaron, something about a pH issue with the huge amounts of lime slurry.
It can be, yeah.
That at least at one point in
Yeah.
previous kind of looking into that was kind of what stopped it.
Yeah.
And I think that was the case with Cliff, if you remember, even the barley straw experiment that we started to look into.
Right. Yeah, I know. I knew there's a pH issue, but I thought we thought it was concluded that it was a viable option. We just weren't ready at the time.
Yeah.
But I forgot.
I'll look back into that. It's been a while since that one has come up. I will say that we did a couple years ago come up with a method discussing different options for internal load management that we could make available if that's of interest. That talks about things like dredging, and there are a couple other options. We'll, spoiler alert, let you know they don't come out looking particularly viable, but it is discussed. So some of those types of questions maybe could be answered in looking at that.
And the whole issue of adding iron to the sediments, which is the subject of that experiment in Shoreview. And I know that's a pond, but I still, when do we think we'll have some reasonable results from that research effort?
So that was supposed to have been done last year. SAFL was going to apply it last year. You know, the mechanism for phosphorus removal is still a little mysterious on that one, to be honest. That there's a few of us at BAR that are a little skeptical because without the addition of oxygen, and if you're, you know, the mechanism doesn't make a lot of sense. So we're kind of watching and waiting to see how these experiments turn out. They have, I think, one pond in another city already treated, and they're trying to figure out how best to apply it. That's the other thing. It's been tricky from a logistical standpoint to
I know. I thought of it more in reviewing some of the tables and showing the iron content in the sediments. And it showed some lakes having low iron content. And I thought, well, maybe it could be augmented through that approach.
Yeah, well, and he has that, and in the table, you can see he does suggest, like, well, you could look at adding some iron. So for example, around Little Canada, maybe Bennett, but you'd have to make sure that you feel like you've got the oxygen.
Right.
So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have just one question, not to beat a dead horse on this.
No, it's okay.
But what is the experience they've had in East Vadness Lake?
Yeah. Yeah, good question. So they inject ferric chloride, inject an iron substance that binds with phosphorus. But my understanding is that they're doing that in locations where water, I think it's even where water is just coming in, so it's oxygenated. So they hit the ferric chloride with the oxygenated water, forms ferric oxide, which precipitates to the deep, that's a very deep lake. So then that precipitates down to the deep part of the lake. And that lake is so deep that that phosphorus, even if it gets released in anoxic waters in the bottom, doesn't make it up to the surface. That's my understanding of that.
And they've also
Is that
done
continuous, Aaron? Is that,
I think so.
Yeah, they do that. They draw the water out after it's treated. They use it for water supply, and you know, it's kind of a continuous process as opposed to, you know, adding it once and trying to oxygenate it.
Yeah, I forget the name, but they also do deep water circulation. And I can't remember the term for that, but
Hypolimnetic aeration.
Draw water from the bottom and bring it up to the top and get it oxygenated, and then it goes back down again.
Yeah, hypolimnetic aeration.
Yep, there we go.
Yep. Yeah, that is done. And that, so, you know, that's where oxygen's a big deal. Like if you can manipulate where it goes, that's good. But it's typically done in deep lake.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think I had one other sort of summary slide here. Oh, and now we're on the, if I put it into slideshow mode, it throws it up onto the screen where I can't see any of you, and it gets really confusing. That's why you can still, oh, there, that took that away. So many months and I'm still learning Zoom, but I asked Keith for what his biggest takeaways were that he thought were most important to convey. And I think you've probably gotten this from this already, but I thought I would put these up here just in case. He said aeration recommendation is based on the observation that intermittent changes in oxygen in some of the lakes readily turned on or off the internal loading. And as we've said, it's not easy to accomplish, more costly, and there is a risk of ineffectiveness or turbidity. And then high organic phosphorus in the lake sediments may make a traditional, like a one-shot alum treatment, so like a full dose one-shot like we did with Coleman, less effective. So you might not get 10 years out of it like you did in Coleman, for example, for a different lake. Or it may require a different approach, which would be multiple, more frequent lower doses over several years, because that organic matter is going to keep coming in. So the idea would be lower doses more frequently. So. And then the only other slide I had tonight was, these are the questions that were in the cover memo before the report in the board packet. So we've talked about a lot of these. Any other comments or questions relative to these questions?
Well, I had some thoughts about several of them. Not that they're really earth-shattering, but I think there's, we need to allow ourselves to benefit from some of the research that's being done. So I would hate to jump to something quickly when we might have another option in a year or two. And personally, I'm not real excited about moving quickly on the at-risk lakes. I think some of the projects we've been implementing and some of the other watershed improvements, even cost share programs, is helping to a smaller degree. But I think we're demonstrating that we're doing things. You know, we're not just ignoring those lakes. We're actually doing projects and we're implementing programs. And I don't think there's anybody at PCA that would at all complain about what we're doing. So I don't think we have to chase any of this. I think the one thing that concerns me is the reduced effectiveness in Coleman Lake. I think it shows that probably we're reaching the end of the life cycle of that treatment. I think this year would be a good test of that. But I think we ought to talk about preparing for possibly another treatment in 2022. I think that's becoming pretty apparent. We're making some great headway in Coleman. I think it's, I hate to lose that momentum and have to catch up so much again. That's all.
Yep. Any other comments or questions?
Just a comment. I agree with Cliff.
Yeah, I think I'll just mention too, I think what Cliff said too about knowing that there is some of this research and we're kind of right around the corner makes sense to kind of wait and see a little bit on that. Guess I'd be interested in hearing from the board if there is any appetite for experimenting with the aeration, and you know, maybe Wakefield's not the best choice, but is there another smaller water body that we'd be interested in working, maybe collaborating with some researchers on looking at that question, or posing that question, I guess, at least to see who's out there and wants to potentially look at that.
I thought Wakefield might be a good choice to look at. Might you didn't know. You know, it's a size lake where I think you could probably pretty effectively deal with it. And there's a little deeper portion of that lake. It's not consistently shallow. I don't know. But yeah, I'm not opposed to exploring aeration. It's just a matter of, can we find a good example where we think it would have some effectiveness? Because I think it's going to be relatively costly for what we achieve, but it is more of a non-intrusive, or well, it's not using chemicals, put it that way.
But Cliff, who would we bond with? Who would we pair with to do this? Do we know a researcher? Do we know somebody who's actually doing this that would be willing to work with us? Or would we be
I'd like to submit it to the Minnesota Stormwater Research Board and try to get something through that. Maybe make it a grant kind of project.
Yeah, I think,
because it's not urgent. We don't have to do it right away. We could
No, I'm just saying,
develop the program and then submit it.
But if you know, if I guess anybody, but I'm looking at you because you've been involved in this, know anybody who really wants to work with this, or who has a project in mind, or you know, the right mechanism, we should investigate that. Or a grant would be even nicer.
I would think we could ask Bar Engineering to reach out to their contacts and see if there's somebody that's really looking at aeration. And
yeah, there we go.
You can look around.
Yeah.
and Diane has her hand up.
Yeah, I would be interested, but would need a lot more information about cost and partners and all that kind of stuff. So maybe at some point there could be a little investigation putting together a model of a package. And then it's probably time for my regular reminder about how West Vadness pollutes everything downstream. And I know that it was in Vlamo's plan a few years ago to do something in the next 5 years. Do we know within the next couple, if they have any plans yet?
So the first thing they were planning to do was complete their TMDL study for West Vadness Lake, and I believe that was on tap for this year. So that's the study, kind of like when we determine what the external and internal load requirements are. And then as part of that study, there's an implementation plan. So that would be something that would develop, and we would be part of that. Staff would be involved in that with Vlamo as a TAC member for sure. So we'll keep you updated on that as that progresses this year.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Larry.
I have kind of a comment or a question. Have these lakes been run through the evaluator tool that we're going to have up one of these days?
The prioritization tool.
Yeah.
Well, so the way that tool is structured now is it's looking at specific projects to benefit, well, in terms of water quality, flooding, and did we land on
Habitat? Mm-hmm.
habitat? Yeah. So it looks at projects that would benefit each of those three areas. And one of the things that gives them, right now anyway, extra credit is if those projects benefit an impaired water body. So in terms of water quality, if there's a project that is deemed cost effective in a feasibility study that benefits Coleman, Wakefield, Bennett, or there's a couple of impaired creeks too, then they would get extra weight within that tool. It's the lakes themselves don't get prioritized. Although, I mean, I guess one could say there are tiers of prioritization. If they're impaired, Tina, what would you say to that?
Well, yeah, I was just going to say it's not part of that tool. That tool is for BMPs that are used to treat those lakes or in those watersheds. Those lakes, the TMDL studies and our RAPS, which was our watershed restoration and protection strategies.
Yeah.
That report was done as required by the MPCA as we were updating our plan in 2017. So that's when all those studies of all the lakes were put together, and the lakes that were determined to be on the impaired waters list kind of ultimately became the top priority. And then that's where we have these at-risk lakes. And that was a designation that the board made at the time when we did that plan. And, so that's some of the questions around those at-risk lakes. That's a designation that we gave. It's not something the PCA was looking for. The question, I guess, lends itself to be, do we focus on our impaired waters where we have state mandates to continue to provide treatment to get them off the list? And what do we do about at risk? We do have a lot of programs. I think like Aaron mentioned, we have a lot of BMP placements, permitting and cost share that are already helping to address those concerns with at-risk lakes. And so the question Aaron was asking is, do we look at internal load for at-risk as well?
Okay, look, part of my question also, which I didn't ask yet, goes back to, aside from the fact that they're on somebody's list, are there any other effects from these lakes being impaired that should raise them in our priority to address? Like, are we killing fish, or can people not swim in the lake? Or I doubt this, but that's the kind of question.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Aaron.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think that's all factored in so we have water quality modeling, and we did a lot of work to identify the pollutants and the reasons why it might be unimpaired or might be at risk or might not be at risk. So that's all factored in there, and the fishable, swimmable designations are all considered as part of that as well.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, that the whole reason that there are the Clean Water Act, that comes down through the states in terms of these impaired waters lists. Those state standards are based on the mandate that all United States lakes be swimmable and fishable. So that's factored into the numbers. So for shallow lakes, again, for phosphorus, it's 60 micrograms per liter during the summer on average. And for deep lakes, it's 40. And there's other metrics in terms of other things, but those are based on evaluating at what point are these lakes not able to support aquatic life, or are they dangerous for people coming in contact with them? So that's sort of embedded in that.
And, all that, they don't just get placed on the list, they're put on the list because of our monitoring. We monitor them, we give that data to the PCA, they say it doesn't meet our standard, and that's how they end up on that list.
Yeah, okay, but I guess my question still is, are these lakes not swimmable and not fishable because of their quality, or is everybody okay with doing that? And we're really
One of my other comments I was going to make is that I don't think any of these lakes are impaired for the uses that that people are desiring to use them for. I mean, like a couple of them aren't swimmable lakes. They're used for some fishing maybe, but most of them don't have boat launches, even like Beaver Lake.
Yeah, in our plan under each water body, we do talk about the designated uses of those lakes. And so that tells you, like Cliff is just saying, if this is a lake that's used for boating or for swimming, some of them have beaches, and so they are used for swimming. And that is that plays into all the designations as well.
Yeah. Does that answer your question, Larry?
Well, kind of.
I mean, if you're asking us whether these lakes, like, do we think that the fact that they might not be meeting those state standards means that they're not fishable? I don't think that's the case. I think the numbers that the state set, I mean, there was a lot of controversy about those numbers and whether they're realistic or not. And we can talk about, certain lakes in Minnesota as to whether they'll ever meet their standards. So there's also a bit of a philosophy behind it, which is make progress, do what is reasonable, make good decisions, and keep monitoring and see what happens. So yeah, I mean, those numbers did not come without a lot of controversy for that very reason.
Okay, so then from my point of view, this is saying to me, it's not time to drop my tools and run out to the lakes. It's more that we need to look at these things, as we've already discussed, see what kind of research we can take advantage of that might make sense for us. But honestly, it doesn't seem to have a high level of urgency.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think it's a grab your tools and run to the lake. I think it's more of a take stock of your tools, research new tools, make sure you know how your lake is doing, and then we'll talk again.
Okay. It's not like when the sewers plug up and Dave has to run out with his hip boots on and unplug them.
No, that is not happening right now.
No, this is a long-term.
Yeah.
Long-term.
Yeah. But in terms of taking stock of your tools and understanding your lake, are there other, I mean, I guess as a final note, unless there are other questions, are there other presentations or pieces of information that would be helpful just to set stage for more discussions on this? I mean, it seems to me like everyone's, following this fine, but, I don't know, is there more information that would be helpful? I mean, we talked about some already.
Well, I would say if there are things that you run across that could help this situation that we need to evaluate, that would be fine. I would think that the Willow Creek filter, which, I presume that's what that was done for, was to help with that.
Yeah.
So if things like that are coming along, certainly bring them to the board for our evaluation.
Yeah.
But it doesn't look to me like there's any real impetus to jump on these things right now, except for doing that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it'll be interesting to see what 2020 will have more limited data, but what that looked like for Coleman and what next year looks like for Coleman. That would be the first lake that it could come up more urgently.
Right.
Yeah.
March?
So Erin, what do you think our next step should be, if any?
Well, what I'm hearing is that everyone seems to be in agreement, and I agree that we keep on keeping on our at-risk lakes in terms of the implementation we're already doing in watersheds. Likewise with Wakefield and Bennett. We watch all of those 3 impaired lakes to see when something might be more urgent. And in the meantime, we track the research that's going on, and we look to maybe even add some effort to different research. But we watch and wait and learn some more, and then we talk again, maybe even in a year.
Okay, just curious, Pam, what do you think of that? Okay,
I think that sounds like a good idea.
all right, thank you.
I agree.
Well, we might as well finish it off, Larry.
I agree too.
And Diane.
Me too.
Wow, Erin, that was quite a report. You did a lot of work there. I'm impressed. I mean, a lot of work.
A lot of chemistry and sediment cores and all sorts of fun stuff.
Well, that too.
Okay, that's all I had.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Erin.
Thank you.
Tina, we're going to now have a communications presentation. Is that correct?
That's right. Lauren Hazenson on our staff is here today. I think it's been, what, 8 months, 7 months now since Lauren's been on staff. She's been really doing a fantastic job considering the circumstances under her hiring and onboarding over this last COVID-19 months. But she's been really doing a good job looking at kind of our communications needs and then what we're looking forward for in 2021. So I thought she should come on here and have some face-to-face time with you and then just talk about her goals and priorities for 2021. So I'll turn it over to Lauren.
Thanks, Tina.
Hi, Lauren.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Rich. All right, let's get going here.
Here we go. You got your...
All right. So this will be relatively brief. I'm going to go through a lot of this information with a relatively quick pace. So if you do have questions, I do have time at the end for those. And I'm more than happy to go over any of the concepts or any of the assessment items that I go over in this presentation with you separately. So I'm going to set the stage a little bit and talk about strategic communications and how that factors into both the work I've been doing in 2020 and the goals that we're setting for 2021. So this is a visualization of traditional communications. So it's pretty linear. You have the sender, you have the message, you have the channel, and you have the recipient. And if you're lucky, you get some feedback and you use that to maybe go through the cycle again, or maybe that's the end of it. This is generally not used anymore by communicators, and there's several reasons for that. The primary one is that it's very vulnerable to miscommunication. Some of that is cognitive bias. So the sender, whether it be staff or someone else, usually visualizes the recipient as somebody very similar to them. So they have the same media consumption habits, they tend to be at the same background, they tend to have the same belief systems, attitudes, those sorts of things. It's why you'll see a pretty strong reflection in the active audience of an organization and the makeup of an organization's staff or leadership. So to move away from that and make sure that we are reaching the wider scope of our audiences and also making sure that we have the right message at the right time for the right people, we focus on strategic communications, primarily because that it focuses on a lot of context. So I know this is very overwhelming. So I'm just going to go from the middle outward. So we have the campaign process, and this is very similar to what we saw in terms of that linear line, except for it's ongoing and it goes with formative research, strategy and tactics, implementation. So it's similar to a scientific process in that way. What this does is it recognizes that not all audiences are the same, that there are demographic differences within the district, and there are what we call psychographic differences. So not everybody is going to have the same values when it comes to water. Not everybody is going to have the same enthusiasm or use the same language as we do in the water management industry. And so those are things that we want to think about when we're trying to reach different audiences. And then we want to continuously monitor and evaluate what we're doing to make sure that we continue to build these relationships with audiences throughout the life of the organization. So there's always areas to improve. It's an ongoing relationship. It's not a linear communication path. And there's other context to this as well. So sociocultural, there's political. So that can be things like people's trust in scientific authority or local government. Technological, so how comfortable are people with, their computers? Do they have access to cell phones? Those sorts of things, we need to put those into factors. And then there's making sure that it's aligned with the leadership of the organization and internal staff. So if you're sending out a very nice communication, but it's not in line with what everybody else is doing in the organization, it's going to create confusion internally, and that will be reflected externally. So these are a couple of benefits that you can see from doing strategic communication this way. One is that it ensures communication reflects the mission and goals of your organization. So you don't lose focus of what's more important. You don't lose focus of the management plan, the strategic direction of the organization. You make sure that the communications always reflects that and reminds your audience that that exists. You have the right messaging using the right tools for the right audience so that you're leveraging the resources you have most effectively. Communications are clear, consistent, and proactive. So you're not asking your audience to work really hard to understand what you're telling them. You're using it in language that they understand. And I'm not necessarily saying versus English versus Spanish, though that can be a factor, but vocabulary, tone, phrasing, those sorts of things. Proactive, meaning we want to interact with audiences before we need to. So before they have maybe a water quality question or concern, before they're experiencing flooding, we want to establish those relationships at that time. And finally, we want to be able to adapt quickly to rising communications needs without losing that overall strategic focus of the communications and our organization. So how does this align with what I've been doing? So basically what I've been doing is building the foundations so that we can have a strategic communication structure throughout the organization. The first thing was to do a thorough assessment. So really looking at that research, that first top part of the central circle that I showed you in terms of that graphic representation of strategic communications. So we wanted to look at the communications model we had, the vehicles. We wanted to look at the existing needs of the organization and at the program level. So we do have relationship with certain audiences at the program level and as an organization as a whole. So our larger communications channels, but also how staff are interacting with different groups on a regular basis. Communication vehicles, high-level priorities, so things that really need to be addressed now or they're far-reaching, and opportunities for us to really, again, leverage what we have more successfully to reach newer audiences and to build stronger relationships with our existing audiences. And now that I'm talking about audiences, some of the work I've been doing is assessing those audiences. So part of that has been metrics. So looking at our analytics, looking at user behavior, tracking comments, but also doing some survey work, which is going to be continuing on into 2021 and beyond, so that we get more information from the audience itself in terms of how they like to engage with our organization, and also where they're at in terms of understanding what a watershed is, what our watershed district does, and how they can be involved. We want to expand our reach within the district, particularly on channels with the most engagement. So that's a lot of what I've been doing the last couple of months. Is one of the things I noticed when I came on board immediately was a lot of our social media channels were very effective in terms of our scope. But there was a significant chunk of that audience that lived in Minneapolis. And that can happen with targeted ads and other things. It may have been happening for a while. I'm not exactly sure of the cause, but it's pretty easy to do. So we were able to correct that and do some targeted engagement, ads, and communications to the geographic areas within the district to make sure that that's more effective, to make sure that we're actually reaching those audiences. So again,
a question, if
yeah,
I
go
may.
ahead.
What are the channels with the most engagement that are applicable to not Minneapolis, but our watershed boundaries?
Yeah, Facebook is by far the most effective media. So we did have a large chunk that was Minneapolis, but that doesn't mean that there weren't audiences in Shoreview, a little bit in St. Paul, North St. Paul, a good chunk in Maplewood. But we needed some growth in Shoreview, and particularly east side of St. Paul on some of those channels. And some of that work is still being done. So our Twitter audience has been pretty static for a while. So I've been working with Seth. Seth's been doing a great job really increasing the number and the variety of posts on Twitter so that we can strategically start to not only grow that audience, but grow the audience engagement on a regular basis.
So have you tried using any of the neighborhood groups?
No, not right now. Sorry, thinking like e-democracy and
yeah, there's a host of those.
Nextdoor.
Right, that's another one.
Yeah.
I was just curious because it's really difficult to communicate without newspapers serving the area and without, if it's just electronic media. So the ones, if you find the magic formula, I would certainly like to know that.
Right. And I mean, that's the issue is there's no across the board magic formula. You're going to find ones that work effectively with different audiences. So I can say Facebook, is working really well, but if we look at the demographics of what we can see there's a difference in gender and there's a difference in age in terms of who's doing that. I can't see race information, but I can see where people are located, what gender they are, and what age they are. So I know that there are gaps there. And those audiences may be engaging more on email, or we may not be reaching them currently. And that is definitely the case with some of these audiences. And it's just going to take us a long time to establish those relationships. And there's certain things that we can do in this environment, but it's going to be pretty effective to be able to, again, start doing some of the survey work and doing some of this engagement work in person again, particularly with those newer audiences. Yeah, it's depending on where their value systems are, depending on how familiar they are with our organization, those sorts of things.
So is there a particular age group that you'd like to target? I mean, if there isn't, I'm just curious.
Right.
Are we trying to get at grade school kids, or do we have different messages planned for all these different demographics?
So I would argue our grade school communication is actually pretty good. It's just not through my work. That would be, it's through the education program. And that's one thing you have to look at too, is there's certain groups that I'm just not going to have a ongoing relationship with because there's a staff member who already does, and it doesn't make sense for me to really be involved in that process. But, looking at the demographics that we have on the website and on our email and our social media, it's pretty in line with what I've seen at other organizations, which is when you're looking at 18 to mid 30s, you're seeing a dip in terms of engagement there. And there's a lot of reasons for that. One of them is time and resource availability. And some of it's just, awareness and interest. Yeah. And you'll see that with different groups too. So, but you never want to make assumptions. That's really in terms of the strategic communication, is the best way for us to know how to communicate with people is for them to tell us themselves. Because there's always going to be a little bit of a human factor in terms of wrong assumptions or, miscommunication, or it happens all the time in marketing and communications. So that's something that we want to do continuously in terms of these metrics and evaluation to make sure that we're getting it right.
Thank you.
Sure. Okay, so I was talking about consistent stories. So I've been doing things like brand and communication standards, expanding those, making sure that all of our main channel communications are done with pretty much the same voice and the same tone. And the same thing with our visuals. And the reason this is important is because it creates familiarity. There's a lot of noise out there, especially now, in terms of how much communications people are consuming, how many visuals they're consuming on a daily basis. So we want to make it as easy as possible. And familiarity and regular communication, it breeds that trust. Again, we want people to know and trust the district before there's a concern, so that we can really disseminate the information that they need, and they can understand what role they can have in that overall partnership of watershed management. It also helps with transparency and aligned messaging. So other things that I've been working on, and I am talking more about the strategic level. There's a lot of day-to-day things that have been worked on too. One of them is increasing the frequency of our e-news, working with staff frequently and doing check-in meetings to make sure that we're all aligned. But I've also been building relationships and strengthening some partnerships throughout the district. And this is something that I've really noticed is a strength of the district as a whole, is working very well with our community partners, whether that's at the local government level or the organization level. So I've been working on getting to know a lot of those people, but also strengthening our relationships with communication staff in particular, because they create the messaging and they're doing this kind of work at their organizations. So it helps for me to know when that's going out, what kind of phrasing is being used, and so we can align our communication, particularly when we're partnering on something. And then finally, COVID communication. And what I mean by that is just making sure that we're providing consistent engagement and messaging, so that we retain those existing audiences and a sense of continuity, even as our day-to-day and some of the programs and projects have to shift because we're living in a pandemic. So that's the foundation, and I only have 2 slides left. What am I doing in 2021? What are we doing in 2021 to build on this? One is creating an organization-wide communication strategy that ties to the management plan goals. So again, we make sure that everything cascades up to that management plan. And we also make sure that, you know, in terms of a timeline, we have a clear timeline of communications. So we're not competing with ourselves communications wise, and we're also maximizing the existing resources that we have, so that basically all of the communications needs, all of our programs, all of the priorities and the projects get the time and the attention that they need to get that engagement with the public. It also helps us do things like just represent a wider scope of the work that the district does, some things that don't get as much time in the sun, like feasibility studies or the permitting work, because it doesn't have as many beautiful photos that accompany it or really fun stories. So we're doing some of that work as well. Creating a evaluation model for a lot of the communications work that we're doing so that it can continuously improve. Building engagement in an area where growth is needed. So some of the things I'm talking about there's several demographics we're talking about. When we talk about that, we can talk about renters, we can talk about people of color, we can talk about geographic areas. There's several categories that we're really working on a regular basis, building that engagement. And then cascading down in terms of communication strategy, making sure that each program for some of the larger projects that they have an overall communication strategy that matches their goals, and they have a calendar. So they know, you know, this is the results I want out of the communications. This is what I'm trying to reflect. We can make sure it's communicated accurately, transparently, right people, right time. And then finally, building resources for what I would call the recurring and popular topics. So things like flood risk mitigation, smart salting, garden maintenance, things that residents might be involved in, businesses might be involved in, making sure that there's resources and tools easily accessible, even when we're not talking about them as an organization. So that is what I've been up to in a nutshell. And I know that was really quick. So if there's anything I can expand on or clarify, I am more than happy to do that.
Thanks, Lauren. I thought that was really interesting. I learned some stuff about communication. I do have a question, just unrelated. I didn't hear you say anything about the website, and I'm wondering if you're in charge of the website or are working with folks who do manage the website to make it maybe have some improved communications. Like, for example, today I was on it and I looked down at the recent project, or I looked at projects and they were all old and I couldn't find any new ones. And then I went to another place where there's projects that I couldn't really, I just kept clicking on really old ones and I couldn't find new ones. And it's just something like that. Just wondering, that's my question.
Yes, that's at the top of the list. Yes, so the website I think is roughly around 3 years old, the new website, and that's usually when you start looking at the structure and ways to tweak it. So there are metrics in terms of what resources are being used really frequently and which ones aren't so much, and how we can basically make some of those resources that we really need people to see a little more visible, make that navigation easier. Of course, without breaking the site. So I work with Simba on some of those things, but I also work with contractors like Windmill Designs and other people to do some of that work. But that is definitely something I would say, you know, on the individual task level that I've been looking at. And I think, you know, there's some other resources like the blog, I think that we'll be looking at as well, seeing how we can tweak that so that people can access it more easily.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, I particularly like the last point that you had on the last slide about taking the information that's being generated and making it available to people. I know every time I read one of these reports, Sage has these really great things that are being done. And to me, that would be a compelling reason for people to want to start coming to the site. The other thing I was interested in is you sent out, I presume our email list is about, what, 1,300, 1,400 people?
Yep, that's about right. 1,300.
Yeah, about a third of them opened up the email. The other 2/3 didn't apparently. About 3% of those actually looked at anything in the email. Is that what I read?
Yes, so I can see the open rate and the click rate. So I know that sounds low, but that's actually pretty high industry. You're looking at about 20% average that people are opening their emails. And there's a lot of reasons for that as well. One is that we're all inundated with email newsletters on a regular basis. So it's really going to be, I would say, farther down in people's, what I would call the customer or the engagement journey. So they're not going to probably have their first encounter with their organization through that email newsletter. That's probably going to be later on. So that 35%, those typically are the people who are familiar with our organization, like it enough to say, okay, I'm going to invest in you sending me something out on a regular basis. But people, those lists, they get old, people move, they get disinterested, that sort of thing happens. So one of the reasons I increased the frequency was actually, I was pleasantly surprised to see the engagement rate and the open rate on those emails in terms of how many people were clicking through and how many people were opening them.
Lauren, I just wanted to say I really appreciate you laying all this out and that it's an organized approach. I know you have daily things to respond to, but having these overarching connected goals that clearly relate to our work and being proactive, I really appreciate that.
Thank you. Appreciate that comment. Anything else I can answer?
Nice job, Lauren. Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren.
Okay. Administrators report.
Yes, so I have the list of meetings attended and then the upcoming meetings and dates. I included all the CAC and Metro Mod meetings as those have been sent out recently, as well as a few of the board meetings. Yes, Cliff? Oh, you're on mute.
All right, thank you, Tina. How about
Yes. On the,
comment?
I'm sorry, I
on the
can't
upcoming
see.
meetings, we don't have the administrator's performance review. We haven't talked about it yet, but typically that is done in January. So I think maybe we talk about at the manager's presentations how you can poll us and find dates that we could do a Zoom review. Do something new.
Yeah.
Cliff, are you in charge of that?
Yes.
That's what I thought, just to be clear.
Yeah, I can send out some options for that before the next board meeting. Is that what you're thinking, Cliff?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
I'll send some options.
Thanks.
Anything else? Anybody?
So the annual meeting reminder for next month, I just want to make sure everybody's available and plans to be there for that, or be here, I guess, for that. And then Kyle is on the line.
Wait a second.
Oh,
to be here, like at your house or the office, or where is here?
No, on Zoom.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just on Zoom. I just wanted to make sure that there wasn't any conflict with that. So just to be aware of that. And then the next item on the agenda is to welcome Kyle to our full-time staff. And Kyle's here tonight. He is attending the meeting. And Kyle, do you want to just give a little background of yourself and let them know what your education, and you've been with the district now a couple of years. So talk a little bit about your experience.
Where is Kyle?
He is here.
I'm right here. Yeah, if I get spotty, I apologize. There was a internet outage down here in Lakeville, so it hasn't quite recovered too much. If I disappear, that's what happened. But yeah, hello everybody. It's nice to see you all again. I'm Kyle Kibitz. I'm the new water quality technician hire. I've been an intern with the watershed district for about a year and 9 months or so. Yeah, background wise, high school, I went to a specialty environmentalist school, School of Environmental Studies at the Minnesota Zoo. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. I have a long history of enjoying the outdoors and enjoying environmentalism, caring about nature, that sort of thing. But went to the zoo school, went to River Falls, got a bachelor's in geology there. My emphasis was hydrogeology, but my research was in sedimentation. And my other major interest is fate and transport of chemicals. Work-wise,
wow, you're impressive, Kyle.
What's that?
I
Well,
said you're
we're getting to the work part. Yeah, so work-wise, I graduated kind of at the height of the Great Recession, so nothing really materialized right away out of the gate there. But about 2 years ago, I had been working in the trades for a while. I decided to leave those and then try to pursue a career doing what I actually cared about, which is this. I was lucky enough to score an interview with Eric for the internship. He liked me, he hired me, and then February of, I guess it's last year now, but February of last year, he talked about bringing me on board full time. So yeah, I'm happy to be here. I really love what the watershed district stands for, the work they do. I really do love, especially the educational outreach that everybody does here. Having come from a high school that emphasized in this sort of thing as well, it's a great operation that you guys run, and I'm excited to be a part of it.
I will add that, we have actually 3 zoo school graduates in our staff. Nicole and Lauren and Kyle all graduated. Oh, there's all our zoo school graduates. But Kyle is an excellent cook. He has brought some fantastic items to our potlucks in the past. And he also is definitely known in our staff as being somebody that jumps in and helps whenever needed, that without hesitation. So
okay, Tina, what is Kyle's best dish?
Oh, I don't know. He made some really good pierogies.
Good enough. That sounds good.
Yeah. Yep.
You're not from the Iron Range, are you?
I did get a smoker for Christmas too, so look
nice.
forward to that once COVID's over.
Yep. Yep. So thanks for being here, Kyle.
Yeah, welcome.
No, it's good seeing y'all, and I'm happy to be here.
Welcome.
We'll see you once we can get in the office.
Oh, I just am waiting for that day.
I know.
To be able to communicate with everybody on a decent level.
Yep.
Yeah.
Me too.
All right, Kyle. Really, it was great seeing you, and I do find you impressive. For whatever that's worth. So where are we?
I appreciate that.
The project and program status reports. So we'll start with 1 and go down to, let's see, what have we got?
There's 20 items. I don't know if you want to go one by one or if you just want to see if there's any comments or questions about anything in particular.
Does anybody have any questions about any of these that you want to talk about specifically?
I do.
Larry has a hand up.
Of course, yes. Question.
I think Cliff did too.
No, I don't.
No? Okay, Larry, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. Has Ramsey County Parks and Recreation approved the permit to allow work in the Phelan Weir?
No, not yet. And I don't think there's any holdup other than their process. So we kind of go through the drafting of our application that has to go through the county attorney. The county attorney gives feedback on how we say things in there, and they kind of that back and forth, and then it gets on the county board's schedule, which they like a preview 2 weeks before they actually act on it. So even though we tried to start these things earlier and earlier each time, it still seems like they they drag on longer and longer. We anticipate having approval in mid-January.
Yeah, so it's on the agenda for a couple weeks from now. I think the holidays too, because their meeting schedule is a little different over the holidays. But and this impacts the Keller channel weir, but not the Phelan,
Okay,
correct?
sorry, yeah,
Yeah.
misspoke. I realized that when I said it.
Perfect.
And
But,
what are we-
but in relation to the project though, Larry, it is moving forward. Dave can comment on the specifics, but on the east outlet of Phelan, they've got the sheeting in, the cofferdam, the dewatering has gone well so far. And I think they're ready to start laying some pipe here fairly soon. So Dave, you were out there today. Do you have anything to add to that?
No, not much more. We should start laying, or they'll start tapping into the actual structure that's there within the next 48 hours or so if everything goes well. So
on that, just popped into my mind. Are we taking photographs or movies or something of what's going on there? Because that's an absolutely fascinating thing that we ought to have some PR for.
I'm using not every day that I'm out there, but I'm taking plenty of photos when I'm out there, just like normal projects and stuff like that. I've got a small archive of photos.
And Lauren, are you, I think Lauren's working with the Ramsey County and St. Paul on some project update information as well.
And I've heard reports from neighbors who live around there that the work is really impressive.
Oh, there's plenty of people that are stopping by and asking questions and taking,
Sure there
taking
are.
their own.
Lots of inspectors.
Oh yeah, they love their cameras out. Everybody walks with their camera out. They're gonna run into something because they're walking with their camera out.
So no, I think it was Larry, somebody said I think that's something that we could use as far as, communications or publicity, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, what they asked the question, what do you guys do? Well, that is a good example of something that I think is pretty exciting.
Well, what people were asking is just, what are you doing? Because there's no, they see the equipment out there and they've got class 5 rock, I guess, underneath the sitting equipment, and nobody has any idea what they're doing.
Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly.
I mean, they don't even know it's a watershed. So, it might be an opportunity just to put up a sign or something.
Yeah.
I noticed that today, actually, you bring that up, and I do have a couple of signs made for our CIP projects that I could run down there. I think it's just watershed, what is it? Watershed management improvement. I think it's just basically those 3 words with our logo in the corner.
That's a great idea, because that was what they're saying. What are they doing there?
Yep,
Yeah,
I'll get it out there.
Okay.
I'll get it out there by the end of the week.
Is there contact information on there too?
I think there's a phone number.
The general
Website.
number, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, I think the general number's on.
Well, you could actually list is it, okay, I don't know, but on our Facebook page, that project, I mean, could they actually look it up?
So the project page will be up tomorrow or Friday, and as soon as we get that up, we'll have a Facebook post. And
so can you guys work together and maybe do the sign and then say, if you interested in this project, it's at, and give the website number or Facebook or whatever?
Yeah, I think our website, my address might be on that sign too, maybe.
Well, I don't know, because I have no idea what the sign looks like.
Yeah, we already have a sign, so we'll just get that out there and they can contact us.
Yeah.
And then we'll have that website to point them to as well.
All right, I'm ready to go. I've done my job for the day.
Oh,
Larry has some more comments or
I had
questions.
a couple other questions. Sorry. In the report on Impaired Lakes, I saw some comments again about modeling and accuracy of it and how it was having trouble. Can we have a discussion sometime about the accuracy of not only the modeling, but also LiDAR? Because I also noticed that when we decided to go and actually survey something instead of using LiDAR, we nearly got shot at. So obviously, there's some compelling interest to not rely on LiDAR for everything. But I'd like to see an overview of those 2 things so that we have more of an idea of what we're faced with when we're making decisions.
Sure.
Okay, Larry, how did we almost get shot at? Because I've not heard that story.
Didn't you read the report? The report said that when they went out to when they went out to survey somebody's property who apparently hadn't been notified, they came out with a gun and said, "Get off my property."
Yeah, the way we've done this in the past to verify elevations for structures, homes that we think are at risk of flooding is, first we do look at the LiDAR, but there is, as Larry mentioned, there's some error involved with those numbers. So we go check it with the survey and we send letters. What we have done in the past for years is sent letters out to these homeowners and explain what we'd like to do, give Tina's number and my number and Brad's number. If you don't want us to come, let us know. And, so we get a couple calls here and there, a couple people saying, don't come. Okay, we take you off the list, or we explain why we're coming, and that's fine. But in this instance, the homeowner had received, a letter was sent. Now that doesn't mean they read it. We can't control that. So surveyor went out and started surveying. It's outside the house, but was approached by a very homeowner who made sure to show that they had a gun in a holster. We're gonna change how we do that now and make it more active process. And actually we met with Lauren to also talk about, district staff and bar staff will get together to talk about how best to word those letters and what that process should be, because we can't, it's hot out there and it's a bit of a different world. And, an active consent is probably better. That will mean we get less consent. So that question of error and accuracy in the LiDAR is relevant. So we'll come back to the board with some more information on that.
That's more what I was looking for. Other than the fact I thought it was a rather remarkable report.
Okay.
And when do we expect what's called the project prioritization tool to be up?
I didn't hear you, Larry. What was that?
Just a reminder that the tool, he's asking about the tool for the ranking of projects. So the tool itself, we're not going to place on the website, but the report will be placed up there. So you'll see the components of the tool. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll talk with Lauren. I think that they sent it to Simba, so we'll make sure we get that. If it's not in the document library, I'll make sure it's in there.
Yep. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I do have a question that has nothing to do with it, but I've got, in going through the packet, it looks like there's items that I have to sign. Do you want me to come in, or how am I going to do that?
No, we've been using your stamp.
Okay, great.
Use your stamp, so.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, Larry. Did you have anything else?
I think he was done.
Thank you.
How about Diane? All right.
Nope,
How about
I'm good.
Pam?
I'm good, thank you.
Cliff?
Anything else? Thanks.
And I don't have anything else, so
Were you going to have a discussion of the MOD annual meeting or not?
So we do have that under the report of managers for managers that attended the MOD annual meeting discussion. If there was items that you wanted to talk about and bring up, and or maybe some takeaways from the conference that you were interested in sharing.
I had taken notes, but I don't know where they are, and now I don't remember anything.
I think
that's great, Pam. Thank you again.
Tina, hasn't MOD allowed access to the other presentations?
Yep, you should have access to all of them now. Yep.
Through the MOD website?
On their MOD website. Yep.
Okay. I had trouble with my computer, or maybe it's my Wi-Fi or something, but I couldn't get into the virtual the companies that were hosting different I don't know what to call it.
Yeah, I can't remember the name.
It was a virtual exhibition.
Yeah. I tried to get into several of them and I never could.
Yeah, that was a little tricky. Yep.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Diane.
Oh, I just had two quick comments. One was that they didn't figure out some of their technology ahead of time. you know, like making sure the speakers were hooked up
Yeah.
and stuff that they could do, but it was the first time, so they can learn. And the other thing was, I enjoyed the groundwater management planning session, and they suggested doing an inventory of groundwater dependent natural resources like springs and wetlands and stuff, and might be good to put that in our mix for some time.
Yeah, we've actually done that already. So that's
Great.
yeah, and that's that document that Evan helped put together that looks at that recharge, discharge, and how water flows through our wetland systems and lake systems.
Yeah, I didn't realize that included all of those pieces, but
Yeah.
great, interesting.
Yeah, that was the presentation that I took the most notes on, as far as how we can, I know groundwater has been a topic that has been of interest from staff and the board over the number of years, and what should we as a watershed take on as our responsibility, and what's our role in this. And I think there was some good takeaways for how we can do some implementation around groundwater, mostly around monitoring, and like you said, studies around those topics.
One question I had at the end of the project status reports was Carrie Magnuson wrote the Citizen Advisory Committee update. Now, several of the board members wanted to see that, so I was wondering if that addresses your concerns. I was at the last meeting, so I can answer questions if there are any.
Yeah, actually, it does help a lot. There are a lot of good suggestions in there, I think.
Yeah.
To be
Yeah,
followed.
she did a good job.
One question I had was, since our annual recognition dinner was canceled, do we still give the artist awards to people who, did anybody win an award? Did they get that thing like that we have every year, or do we just give them a calendar and say thanks for coming?
So we didn't, yeah, we didn't do any of the Watershed Excellence Awards this year. So we didn't solicit and make choices on that. So what we did was just the calendar this year. And there were some suggestions for awards, and we decided to hang on to them for next year.
Okay.
Or this year now.
Did we have any good candidates for an award?
Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head.
That's okay.
Yeah, I know there was a few suggestions, but we didn't really go very deep down that road this year.
Okay.
Well, with the COVID-19 restrictions, the whole year was restricted.
That's all I have for tonight.
Hey.
That's really all I have. Anybody else? Diane, Larry, Pam?
I'll move, we adjourn.
I'll second.
Well, I guess we're adjourned. And
Thanks.
Happy New Year and all that stuff to everybody. And I guess we won't talk to you until next month.
Yeah. Talk to you later.
All right, bye everyone.
Bye.
Happy New Year, everyone. Bye.
Happy New Year.